Have you ever felt like you've lived this life before? Not in some vague, romanticized sense, but in a way that gnaws at the edges of your memory, like a whisper from some place just out of reach. Maybe you've caught yourself watching the world unfold around you and a strange peace overtakes you, like you're not really in the world anymore, just watching it. If that sounds like you, I want you to listen carefully, because what you're feeling may not be imagination. It may be the unmistakable sign that your soul is living its final life here on earth. Most people wander through life thinking this is it. One birth, one death, one chance to get it right. But the truth is far older and far deeper. According to the teachings of Edgar Cayce, often called the sleeping prophet, you've been here before, many times. You've worn many names, loved many people, struggled and grown and suffered and healed again and again. Earth is not your origin. It's your training ground, and everything you've endured, every heartbreak, every challenge, every triumph, has been leading you to this very moment. But here's the thing most people never realize. Not every soul reincarnates forever. There comes a point when the lessons are complete, when the soul has walked enough miles, learned enough compassion, and reached a state of wholeness where it no longer needs to return. This moment, the soul's graduation, is what Cayce described as the final incarnation. And if you're watching this, you might be feeling the first subtle signs that your soul is nearing that sacred threshold. It doesn't begin with fireworks or visions, it begins with stillness, a quiet knowing, a kind of inner silence that doesn't need answers anymore. You start to feel a growing detachment, not out of apathy but out of deep understanding. You no longer feel the pull toward the things you once chased. Fame doesn't call to you, competition feels meaningless, material goals that once stirred your ambition now fall flat, and yet you're not sad about it. You're free. It's as if something ancient inside you has finally exhaled. The chase is over. Because you've remembered, it was never about the destination. It was always about the becoming. One of the most profound indicators that your soul is approaching its final incarnation is the emergence of peace in places where chaos used to thrive. Think about that. When someone insults you now, you feel compassion instead of offense. When plans fall apart, you don't spiral. You breathe. It's not that you don't care, it's that you see the bigger picture. Your soul isn't reacting from ego anymore, it's responding from presence. You may have noticed that your intuition has gotten louder too, not just with gut feelings, but with moments of strange clarity. You know things before they happen. You meet someone and instantly feel their energy before a word is spoken. You wake from dreams with messages that feel more real than waking life. It's as if the veil between this world and the next has grown thinner, and you're beginning to see through it. This isn't a coincidence. It's a soul that's been here so many times it no longer needs to rely on the five senses. It begins to live from a deeper knowing, a kind of timeless awareness. And because of that, time itself begins to feel irrelevant. Days blend together. You're less interested in clocks, calendars, or milestones. Instead, you live moment to moment, fully, quietly, gratefully. You're not rushing anymore, because some part of you remembers there's nowhere else to go. You've already been everywhere. But here's where it gets even more beautiful and even more mysterious. You begin to love without condition. You find yourself forgiving people who never apologized. You stop labeling things as good or bad, right or wrong. Instead, you start seeing them all as parts of a bigger divine design. People who used to trigger you, now they become mirrors, lessons, teachers. You don't want revenge, you want understanding. You don't seek to win arguments, you seek to listen. That's the difference. That's the mark of a soul who isn't trying to prove anything anymore, because it already knows. There's also this strange sensation of being in the world but not of it, like you're participating in a play you've performed in many times before. You go through the motions, but something inside is always watching, always remembering the rules of society, the expectations of others, the cultural noise. It all starts to feel like background static. You're not judging it, you just no longer identify with it. That's how you know you're evolving. Detachment becomes your superpower, not because you've shut yourself off, but because your soul has begun to outgrow this level of experience. Edgar Cayce spoke about this with deep reverence. In his readings, he described individuals whose souls were completing their journey on Earth. Souls who had incarnated through many lifetimes, across many cultures, learning many lessons. These souls often came into their final lifetime with a profound sense of service, but no desire for recognition. They were healers, teachers, artists, mystics, working behind the scenes not for applause, but because it was in their nature to help others evolve too. And that may be you. You might feel exhausted, not just physically, but spiritually, as if you've carried the weight of lifetimes on your shoulders, and yet there's a quiet strength underneath it all. You're not bitter, you're wise. You've seen empires rise and fall, relationships blossom and fade, victories become meaningless, and still you show up every day with an open heart. That is no ordinary resilience. That is ancient endurance, the kind only a soul nearing completion can carry. You may feel disconnected from many people around you, not because you're antisocial, but because it's hard to find others who speak the same soul language. Conversations about gossip or material things feel shallow. You crave depth, silence, truth. You'd rather sit under the stars and talk about the nature of existence than argue over politics or trends. That craving isn't accidental. It's your soul's memory waking up. It remembers who you are, and it's guiding you home. You've probably wondered at some point, why am I here? Why this life? Why these exact people, these particular struggles, this strange timing? The answer lies in something Edgar Cayce referred to often, what he called the journey of the soul. To Cayce, reincarnation wasn't just a mystical idea. It was a sacred map, a blueprint of evolution drawn across lifetimes. In his visions, he saw souls returning to Earth not as punishment, but as progression. Each life, each incarnation, was like a single chapter in a much larger story. And the story? It always had the same goal: wholeness, union with the divine, a remembering of who you truly are. This world, the one you're living in right now, isn't your origin, and it isn't your destination. It's your classroom, and your life is the curriculum. Earth is a place where souls come to grow. Not because it's easy, but because it's precise. Here, you feel pain. Here, you learn patience. Here, you experience separation so you can remember connection. Every struggle you face, every wound you've carried, even the joy that catches you by surprise. None of it is random. It's all part of your soul's syllabus. Each moment is designed to reflect a deeper truth back to you until you no longer need the mirror. Cayce spoke often about karma, not as retribution but as education. Karma isn't the universe punishing you for something you did. It's the soul bringing back into its field the energy it needs to understand, heal, or complete. When you hurt someone in a past life, it may return, not so you can suffer, but so you can finally understand. When you deny love in one life, the next may bring a longing so intense it breaks you open and teaches you how to receive. You're not here to be punished. You're here to be polished. Imagine a diamond in the rough. Every lifetime chips away the unnecessary: ego, fear, greed, control. And as those layers fall away, something radiant begins to shine through. The true you, the eternal part that has never been hurt, never been broken, never been lost. But even before you arrived here, in this life, you made choices, soul-level choices. You chose your body, you chose your family, you chose certain events, people, even pains, that would give you the precise environment to awaken. And I know that can be a hard truth, especially if you've endured trauma, betrayal, abandonment. You might be asking, why would I ever choose that? But the soul doesn't choose from fear. It chooses from growth, it sees the full picture, and it knows that sometimes the deepest pain unlocks the highest compassion. You may have heard of something called a soul contract. That's not just spiritual poetry, it's real. On some level, before you were born, you sat with other souls, perhaps ones you've incarnated with many times, and agreed to play out certain roles with one another. Some would be your lovers, some your teachers, some your betrayers, not because they hate you, to reflect back the parts of yourself that still need to heal. These contracts are written not in ink but in energy. They're sacred, and they're timed perfectly. That's why certain people come into your life and shake everything up. It's not random. They're triggering your syllabus. They're helping you remember the lesson you chose to learn here. And yet, even within that design, you have free will. That's one of the most extraordinary parts of this entire process. You may have agreed to meet a certain soul, to face a certain challenge, to experience a particular loss. But how you respond to it, that's up to you. That's the real growth. Because evolution isn't automatic, it's awakened through choice. And with every choice you make, from how you forgive to how you show up to how you let go, you are either looping the lesson again or transcending it. Now here's the part that many people miss. The soul doesn't just keep reincarnating forever. There's a natural arc, a rhythm. Casey described it as a spiral, not a circle. You don't come back to the same point. You ascend through each life, higher and wider, until eventually you reach the summit. And at that summit, something miraculous happens. You realize you no longer need to return. The karma is balanced. The patterns are cleared. The contracts are complete. You've remembered your divine nature so fully that Earth has nothing left to teach you. That's the final incarnation. It doesn't mean you're perfect. It doesn't mean you float through life without pain or doubt. But it does mean you've integrated enough wisdom to live beyond the ego, to love without needing a reason, to serve without needing reward. It means you live for the soul's truth, not the world's approval, and that's rare, that's powerful, that's holy. So if you feel like you've always been an old soul, if you've struggled to understand why you carry emotions deeper than most, why you feel things before they happen, why people seem to come to you for guidance without knowing why, you might not be imagining it. You might be remembering it. You might be standing on the very edge of that sacred threshold between one last lesson and liberation, and you don't need anyone to tell you that. Because if your soul is truly nearing its completion, you already know. There comes a point in your journey where peace stops being something you chase and becomes something you are. Not because your life is perfect, not because the world has stopped testing you, but because you've stopped reacting from fear. If chaos no longer shakes you the way it used to, if you can sit inside the storm and still feel steady, then you're touching something sacred. That's not just emotional maturity. That's soul completion. Deep inner peace is one of the first signs that you may be living your final life. It's not a surface-level positivity. It's a calm that exists underneath pain. You may still cry, you may still grieve, but beneath all of it is a presence, a quiet knowing that everything is unfolding exactly as it should. You're no longer at war with life. You've surrendered, not in defeat, but in grace. And that surrender is strength, because it's the kind that comes only when the soul has nothing left to prove. You've stopped resisting reality because on a deeper level you understand that even your suffering has a sacred purpose, and that changes everything. The next sign is something even more mysterious, a natural detachment from the world. This doesn't mean you become cold or indifferent. It doesn't mean you stop loving people or stop enjoying life's beauty. In fact, your love grows deeper, but your attachments, they begin to dissolve. Fame no longer calls to you. Status loses its shine. Material goals start to feel hollow. You may find that you're no longer chasing the things others seem obsessed with. Money, recognition, power, popularity. You're not depressed. You're not lost. You're simply done. It's like your soul has seen the illusion behind the game of success, comparison, validation, and now it has no interest in playing. Not because you're bitter, but because you've outgrown it. That kind of detachment is not apathy, it's liberation. You begin to find joy in simplicity, a cup of tea, a moment of silence, a walk under the stars. You're not chasing highs anymore. You're resting in wholeness. That's the signature of a soul that remembers who it is. And that remembrance doesn't just show up emotionally, it shows up psychically. Your intuition begins to sharpen. Not gradually, but dramatically. You know things you shouldn't logically know. You feel events before they happen. You meet a stranger and instantly feel their soul before they even speak. Time itself begins to feel strange. Sometimes it stretches, sometimes it collapses. You start to notice synchronicities everywhere. Déjà vu becomes less of a surprise and more of a quiet confirmation. Yes, I've been here before. That's because your soul is no longer confined to the linear timeline most people live by. You begin to operate in what Casey called the eternal now, where time is not a line but a spiral. And the further along that spiral you travel, the more sensitive you become to the movements of the universe. You may wake from dreams that feel more real than waking life. Dreams of flying, of graduating, of boarding a ship or saying goodbye to familiar places. These aren't just dreams, they're messages, they're preparations. Your soul is beginning to remember that it's almost time to move on, and that message comes in symbols your conscious mind can understand. Another profound sign of the final incarnation is the rise of deep empathy and non-judgment. You begin to feel the suffering of others not in a burdensome way, but in a way that softens you. Even people who've hurt you deeply. You begin to understand them. You see their pain. You recognize their patterns. You don't condone everything, but you understand. You stop needing to be right. You stop needing to fix people. You just love them as they are. You begin to see everyone as another version of yourself. That's not a metaphor, it's an energetic truth. You realize that every person you meet is a mirror, reflecting a piece of the universal self. And you, having walked so many lifetimes, have finally begun to see through the illusion of separation. There is no them. There is only us. And when you begin to live from that awareness, not as a concept, but as a reality, judgment dies. Compassion is all that's left. That compassion starts to bleed into every area of your life, even in traffic, even at the grocery store, even in silence. You don't need grand acts to feel spiritual anymore. Kindness is enough. Presence is enough. Your energy is your offering, and that offering gets stronger the more you notice the strange patterns showing up in your life. You might be seeing repeating number sequences, 111, 222, 333. You may glance at the clock and it's always 11:11 or 4:44. At first it might feel like a coincidence, but eventually it becomes so frequent that you can't deny it. That's the universe speaking in code. That's your spirit team confirming you're on track. You're waking up. Synchronicity becomes your new language. You might even start to have dreams that feel more like messages than stories. Dreams where you're boarding trains or ships, walking across bridges or packing up your things. These symbols are powerful. They don't mean death. They mean transition. They mean elevation. You may dream of light, of teachers, of places that don't exist on Earth but feel more like home than anything you've ever known. That's not fantasy. That's memory. That's your soul remembering where it's going and where it came from. Because as you near the end of your soul cycle on Earth, your awareness expands. You begin to remember lives you've never been taught about. You meet people and feel instant recognition, as if you've known them across time. That's because you have soul families, twin flames, karmic companions. They begin to return one last time, not to repeat the past, but to complete it. And with each layer you shed, each expectation, each attachment, each false identity, you begin to rise, not physically, spiritually. You begin to embody the energy of completion, and that energy is unmistakable. As your soul approaches the end of its earthly curriculum, one of the most profound shifts you experience is the unraveling of the ego. Not through force, not through discipline, but through irrelevance. It simply fades. The ego is the part of you that needs to be right, to be seen, to be safe, to be special. And in the earlier stages of the soul's journey, it serves a purpose. It protects you, defines you, gives you a sense of separation so that you can begin the long walk back to unity. But at the edge of soul mastery, the ego begins to dissolve, not because you fight it, but because you no longer need it. You stop defending yourself because there's nothing left to protect. Your sense of identity no longer comes from what you do, what you own, how others perceive you, or what role you play in society. You don't need titles. You don't need to be known. You don't even need to explain yourself anymore. You're not trying to convince anyone of anything, not even yourself. Instead, you begin to live from something deeper, something quieter, something truer, a presence that just is without needing to be anything else. And that simplicity begins to shape your entire way of living. Final lifetimes are often marked by a deep yearning for minimalism, but not in the trendy aesthetic sense. It's not about clean closets or white walls, it's about energetic space. You begin craving fewer distractions, less noise, less clutter. You'd rather have an empty room filled with silence than a full one filled with chaos. You find yourself pulled toward nature, toward trees, oceans, open skies, not because you're trying to escape the world, but because nature reflects back the truth your soul already knows, that you are enough just as you are, that nothing needs to be added, polished, or earned. Solitude no longer feels lonely. It feels sacred. You stop needing to be constantly stimulated. You start finding magic in stillness, in watching the wind move through leaves, in listening to the sound of your own breath. You realize that presence is more nourishing than any possession. That's when you know your soul has started to rest. You also begin to detach from outcomes. You might still work, create, build, and dream, but the attachment to results starts to fall away. You paint because it brings you peace, not because it makes you money. You speak your truth because it frees your soul, not because it wins approval. You help others because it's your nature, not because it guarantees praise. You start doing things for their spiritual worth, not their social reward. And that changes everything. You stop measuring your life by how successful you are. Instead, you measure it by how aligned you feel. You care less about achievement and more about integrity. You begin asking different questions. Not, how can I get more, but how can I give more? Not, how can I win, but how can I serve? This is the shift from personal will to universal will. You stop asking, what should I do, and begin listening for, what am I here to serve? That subtle reorientation from self-centered action to soul-centered purpose is a hallmark of a soul in its final incarnation. You don't move through the world trying to bend it to your desires anymore. You move with it. You attune to the flow. You trust the timing. You surrender the need to control, and instead, you align. That alignment becomes your compass. If something feels forced, you step back. If it feels inspired, you follow it. You learn to trust your inner rhythm more than external advice. And that trust opens you to something extraordinary. The awareness that your life is not about you, and yet it's being lived entirely through you. You become a vessel. Your words become offerings. Your presence becomes a balm. People feel different after being near you, and they may not even know why. That's the power of an aligned soul. It doesn't preach, it radiates. And even though this alignment brings deep peace, it also brings a kind of vulnerability, because you begin to feel everything. You feel the suffering in the world, you feel the joy in strangers, you weep at the sound of music, you ache when the earth is harmed. You feel the interconnectedness of everything, and it breaks you open in the most beautiful way. But you wouldn't trade it for anything, because now even pain becomes sacred. You start to understand that the point of life was never to avoid the dark, it was to become the light inside it. And now, That light is you. You're no longer afraid of endings. You're not afraid of loss. You're not afraid of death. Because you remember. You remember that you've been here before. You remember that nothing truly dies. It only changes form. And you, as the witness, as the soul, as the awareness, have never once been touched by time. So you start living differently. You speak slower. You listen deeper. You offer love more freely, and you let go more easily. You're not here to be right. You're here to be real. You're not here to climb. You're here to connect. And that connection, whether with a tree, a stranger, or the divine, is all you ever truly wanted. The irony is, when the soul reaches its final incarnation, it finally begins to live, not from fear, but from freedom, not from grasping, but from grace, not from the illusion of separateness, but from the truth of oneness. And in that way, your very existence becomes a kind of blessing, not just for you, but for everyone you encounter. Because a soul that is complete doesn't need to shine. It simply can't help it. There's a certain kind of homesickness that doesn't make sense to the mind, but is unmistakable to the soul. It's not about missing a place or a person. It's about missing a state of being, a harmony, a lightness, a purity that this world, no matter how beautiful, just can't quite offer. If you've ever felt that unexplainable longing, that ache for something you can't name, you might be feeling the quiet echo of a soul that's almost finished here. Edgar Cayce often spoke about this specific kind of spiritual homesickness. He said that souls nearing their final incarnation often feel profoundly out of place, not in a negative or judgmental way, but in a soft, persistent sense that this world is no longer the right fit, that the systems, the chaos, the noise, even the ambitions of earth feel strangely foreign, like trying to wear clothes that no longer fit your spirit. And it doesn't stop there. Souls in their final life may also experience something harder to talk about, a deep, persistent fatigue, not the kind that sleep fixes, but the kind that comes from remembering too much. You may find that you tire easily in environments that are dense with ego, conflict, or superficiality. You may notice that social situations feel more draining than they used to. Even small talk can feel exhausting, because your soul is longing for depth, for quiet, for truth. This fatigue isn't weakness, it's wisdom. You've spent lifetimes absorbing, giving, growing, and now the noise of the world feels less like an opportunity and more like an echo. You no longer resonate with the race. You don't want to keep up. You want to slow down. You want to go inward. That's not depression. That's evolution. And alongside that fatigue, there's another clue. Your soul's relentless pull toward healing, teaching, or spiritual service. You may find yourself deeply compelled to help others heal, not because it makes you look good or builds your reputation, but because you can't not. You might be the person others naturally confide in. You may have been called an old soul, a light worker, or wise beyond your years since childhood. You're probably the one who feels most alive when you're serving a deeper purpose, even if no one ever thanks you. Recognition doesn't matter anymore. Your soul is no longer fueled by applause. It's fueled by alignment. Whether you're writing, holding space, teaching, listening, or simply being present, if it feels sacred, it's enough. And you've come to trust that deeply. This is a hallmark of the final life. Service without self-interest. Wisdom without ego. Love without condition. Cayce saw these souls as torchbearers, quietly anchoring light into places that needed it most. Not to dominate, not to convert, but to illuminate. He spoke often about archetypal souls who returned again and again, not for their own growth, but for the healing of humanity. He believed that Thomas Jefferson, for example, had lived many lifetimes as a leader, not because he craved power, but because his soul was carrying through a thread of purpose across time. He referred to one of his own past lives as Ra-Ta, an Egyptian high priest whose teachings were centered around purification of the body and reawakening the soul. Ra-Ta was not perfect, but his role was vital, bridging the spiritual and the physical, guiding others back to their divine blueprint. And that's the essence of a final life soul, You're not here to rule. You're here to remind. You don't need a platform. You don't need a title. Sometimes your most powerful work happens in silence, in energy, in presence. When you walk into a room and shift the atmosphere without saying a word, when you hold space for someone to break open and heal without giving advice, when you transmit love just by being, you're doing the work your soul incarnated to complete. And if you've ever felt that strange pressure like time is running out, not in a fearful way but in a sense of urgency to share your gifts, to tell your truth, to align your life with your spirit, it may be your soul's signal that this is your last act, not because you're done living, but because you're finally living as your truest self. There's a sacredness to that kind of presence. People may not always understand you. In fact, you might often feel misunderstood, but you don't mind. Because you're not here to be understood. You're here to be authentic. And that authenticity is your final gift to this world. It's not about preaching. It's not about being right. It's about embodying the truth you've earned through lifetimes of learning. The truth that love is the only thing that survives death. The truth that forgiveness is liberation. The truth that everything you've ever needed was already within you. You begin to see that every wound led to wisdom, every mistake led to mastery, every detour was part of the map. And now, standing here with all of that integrated, you become a living reflection of the divine. Not because you are better, but because you are finally whole. And the more whole you become, the more your life becomes simple, sacred, and surrendered. That's the path of a final life soul. And whether the world knows it or not, your very presence is shifting the vibration of this planet, one quiet, holy moment at a time. There's a strange weight that comes with knowing, a sacred heaviness that settles in the soul when you start to remember, not with your mind, but with your essence. When you begin to recognize that you're not just living this life, you're completing something far older, far deeper, far more vast than anything most people around you can see. And with that recognition comes a paradox, what we might call the blessing and the burden of the final life. You may feel a kind of loneliness that has nothing to do with who's around you. You could be surrounded by people who love you, people who mean well, and still feel slightly apart, slightly elsewhere. Not because you're broken, not because you're distant, but because you remember too much. You remember what it feels like to be one with the source. You remember lives where language wasn't needed to communicate love. You remember times when your body was light, your mission was clear, and your connection to the divine was not questioned, it was lived. So, now, here, in this dense world of separation and noise, it can feel like walking through a dream that's just a little too heavy. You may find it hard to connect deeply, not because you don't care, but because small talk feels exhausting, superficial relationships feel hollow, and most conversations don't touch the frequency you're tuned to anymore. That's the burden. The blessing, though, is that your heart still opens. You still love, you still give, you still show up. Not because it fills a void, but because your nature has become generosity. You give not to get, but because love flows through you like breath. It has to move. It has to be shared. And that, in itself, is the proof that your soul is nearing its spiritual graduation. Now, let's be clear. Completing your karmic journey doesn't mean perfection. It doesn't mean you never get angry or tired or confused. It means you no longer get stuck there. It means you've learned how to move through emotion without becoming it, how to witness your thoughts without believing every one, how to honor your pain without identifying with it. That's balance. That's what the final life teaches you, not how to be flawless, but how to be free. You're not reacting from woundedness anymore. You're responding from awareness. And when you do fall, when you do forget, you recover faster. You forgive yourself quicker. You return to center with grace. Because the soul that's nearly complete no longer seeks drama, it seeks peace. And when peace becomes your priority, everything begins to reorient around it. You start to see that even the most difficult people in your life were your greatest teachers. You stop holding grudges, not because the pain didn't matter, but because the lesson mattered more. You recognize that forgiveness isn't a gift you give to others, it's a key that unlocks your own freedom. That's when you begin to truly understand the nature of karma. It's not a punishment system, it's not the universe keeping score, it's a balancing act. And once the energy is neutral, once the soul has stopped reacting from survival and started creating from love, that karmic wheel no longer needs to spin. That's spiritual graduation. But here's the part most people don't talk about. Graduation doesn't mean retirement, it means service. When the soul completes its curriculum, it doesn't just vanish into the stars. It turns back toward humanity with an open hand and says, "How can I help?" Not because it has to, but because it wants to. And this service doesn't always look like some grand mission. Sometimes it looks like caring for a dying parent with grace. Sometimes it looks like smiling at a stranger who's having the worst day of their life. Sometimes it's holding a friend while they cry. Sometimes it's sharing your story, not to impress, but to uplift. Your life becomes your ministry, your presence becomes your offering, and your energy becomes a safe place for others to remember who they are too. You begin to teach simply by being. People may not even know why they feel better after being around you. They may not have language for it. But your calm, your clarity, your authenticity, it speaks to something ancient inside of them. It reminds them of something they forgot, that they too are divine. That's the silent, powerful role of a final life soul. You're not here to stand on a pedestal. You're here to walk among others as proof that love can live in form, that peace is possible even in chaos, that wholeness is not some future goal, but a present truth. And yes, it can be isolating at times. There are moments when you may want someone to understand your depth, your fatigue, your strange visions, your tears that come without warning. But know this, your soul is never alone. Even when the world doesn't see you, the universe surrounds you. You are held. You are honored. You are seen by the eyes that matter most, the ones beyond this realm, who have watched you rise lifetime after lifetime, who have waited patiently for this very moment when you'd finally remember who you are. And now you do, not in theory, but in your body, in your breath, in your silence. You've become the wisdom you used to seek. You've become the light you used to chase. And now, with nothing left to prove and everything left to give, you walk this world not as someone trying to finish the journey, but as someone who is the journey itself. And that is the greatest blessing of all. So what happens when it's over? What happens when the final breath has been taken, the last lesson embodied, the soul released from the gravity of earth? Edgar Cayce offered glimpses, beautiful, detailed glimpses, of what comes after this life, and according to his readings, what awaits us beyond the veil is not judgment, it's not punishment, it's clarity. The first step, he said, is the life review. But this isn't a courtroom, it's a mirror. You are shown your life not just through your own eyes, but through the hearts of everyone you touched. You feel what they felt, the joy you gave, the pain you caused, the kindness that rippled outward in ways you never imagined. Nothing is hidden, nothing is condemned. It's not about guilt, it's about understanding. And that understanding becomes your compass. From there, you enter what Cayce called the inter-betweener state, a space of rest, reflection, and choice. It's not static, it's vibrational. Souls gravitate toward dimensions that match their frequency. The more loving, aware, and balanced you've become, the higher the realm you inhabit. And here something incredible happens. You remember. You remember who you've been across lifetimes. You remember the soul contract, the missions, the growth. You remember the oneness that connects all beings, and you feel it, not just as an idea, but as a reality. This is the spirit realm, the place between lives. A realm of energy, light, and communion. A realm where you don't need words to express yourself, because thought becomes creation, where intention is action, where love is the atmosphere. And once you've integrated your most recent life, you have a choice. Some souls, Casey said, choose to return, not because they have to, but because their love is so vast, their compassion so full, that they volunteer to come back into the density of earth, not to learn, but to serve. These are the returners, the guides, the souls who've already graduated but come back wearing human form to hold space for others still awakening. They often live quiet lives. They don't seek attention, but their presence carries something ancient, something unmistakably sacred. You might be one of them. But for those who are truly complete, for those who have balanced their karma, fulfilled their soul agreements, and remembered their divinity, another path opens. The path beyond the wheel. This is the path that transcends reincarnation, because once your soul no longer needs Earth's classroom, it steps into a new stage of evolution, one not bound by physical form. Cassie described these post-Earth stages as vibrational realms where souls continue to grow, not through suffering or duality, but through co-creation, through light, through alignment with the greater harmonies of the cosmos. You might become a guide, a protector, a teacher in the spiritual planes. You might help design blueprints for souls still incarnating. You might assist in planetary healing, not as a body, but as a field of consciousness. Or you might simply rest, for a time, returning to the source, basking in the frequency of pure being, reuniting with the divine not as something separate, but as something you are. And yet, even from that place of peace, you still remain connected to this world, not as a prisoner, but as a guardian. Your presence continues, echoing in the hearts of those you loved, whispering into the dreams of those still here, anchoring wisdom in the field of humanity. That's the truth most people forget. Death is not disappearance, it's transition. Completion is not extinction, it's expansion. When the soul finishes its cycle here, it doesn't vanish. It finally becomes what it's always been beneath the veil, infinite, radiant and free, free from the hunger of ego, free from the cycles of karma, free from the need to return to density in order to grow. And in that freedom something else is born, a soul who can now choose to create, not from need, but from love. You're no longer being pulled by old wounds, you're being moved by sacred desire, not to fix anything, but to bless everything. Your consciousness begins to ripple outward, harmonizing with galaxies, collaborating with other souls, participating in the great unfolding of the universe itself. You become a part of the divine architect. That's what comes after Earth. Not a throne, not a reward, not a retirement home in the sky, but a return to unity, a return to truth, a return to love so vast it no longer needs a name. And the most extraordinary part, that reality is already inside you, right now, in this breath, this moment. You don't have to die to access it, you just have to remember. Because what Casey knew, and what the ancients whispered, and what your soul already suspects, is that the final life isn't the end of the journey, it's the beginning of the real one. The one without masks, the one without forgetting, the one where you finally get to be what you've always been becoming. And if you're feeling that now, if something in you knows this life is different, deeper, more deliberate, then maybe, just maybe, you're already standing on the edge of that holy horizon, and just beyond it is everything. So where does this leave you? If you've made it this far, if something deep inside you has been stirred by these words, not as information but as recognition, then this final truth is for you. You were never lost. You were never behind. You were never broken. Every lifetime, every challenge, every moment of doubt was a part of your sacred unfolding. A soul doesn't evolve in straight lines. It spirals, falling and rising, forgetting and remembering, collapsing and expanding, until the day comes when the forgetting is no longer possible. And that day may already be here. Because the truth is, You don't need anyone to declare that this is your final life. You'll know. You'll know because the things that used to thrill you now leave you quiet. You'll know because the wars you used to fight inside your mind have grown still. You'll know because love has stopped being a transaction and started being your natural state. You'll know because you've stopped trying to change others and started becoming who you are, unapologetically. And you'll know because nothing else makes sense anymore. You're no longer driven by the external. You've begun to live from your center, from a place beyond fear, beyond control, beyond striving. You've started asking different questions, not how do I win, but what do I remember? Not what do I get, but how can I serve? You see, that's the final alchemy. When the soul reaches its highest resonance, it doesn't become distant, it becomes available. Not to everyone, but to those who are ready, to those who need the frequency you now embody. And that embodiment is your final assignment. Your job now isn't to do more, it's to be more, to be present, to be true, to be light. Even if no one notices, even if no one understands, even if you walk quietly through this world while carrying the codes of 1,000 lifetimes within your chest. You walk anyway, you give anyway, you love anyway, because that's what the final life is about. It's not a finish line, it's a soft merging. The walls fall away, the masks dissolve, the need for labels, for validation, for performance, it all disappears. What's left is essence. What's left is truth. What's left is the quiet, holy flame inside you that cannot be extinguished, the flame that says, you are source remembering itself. You are what the ancient ones prophesied, what the mystics dreamed of, what the stars still sing about. And now, you're here. Not to prove anything, not to fix everything, but simply to hold the vibration, to live as proof that love is real, that peace is possible, that awakening is not an escape, but a return. And maybe you're tired, maybe you've been carrying this knowing for a long time without the language to express it. Maybe you've wondered why life feels so dense, why your dreams feel so far away, why the world seems so loud, while you're becoming so quiet inside. But here's the truth, dear one. You're not breaking down. You're breaking through. You're shedding the layers that no longer belong to you. You're stepping into the final phase of your soul's earth story, and while that can feel isolating, while it can feel strange, even heavy, know this. You are not alone. There are others like you. They may be scattered across the planet, hidden behind ordinary lives, speaking softly in a world addicted to noise, but they are here. Old souls, finer life walkers, guardians of remembrance. You may pass them on the street, sit beside them in silence, feel them in your dreams, and when you do, something ancient will stir. Not words, not titles, just recognition. And in that moment you'll know, we are returning together, graduating together, not from a place of superiority, but from a place of surrender. Because the truth is, once the soul completes its cycle, it finally understands it was never about leaving earth behind. It was about bringing heaven here, in your gaze, in your breath, in the way you show up to each moment. So breathe now. Breathe, not as someone trying to fix themselves, but as someone returning to themselves. You've walked through fire to be here. You've walked through lifetimes. And now, you're walking home. And with every step, the earth becomes more sacred. The veil grows thinner. And the light that you are becomes impossible to ignore. So go ahead. Live, love, laugh, grieve. Create. Rest. Speak your truth with tenderness, hold space with compassion, and let the quiet strength of your soul be the lighthouse it was always meant to be. Because whether you stay or whether you go, you have already become what you were always destined to become. Whole, free. awake.